Hey everyone, it's Shay on the mic. We're going beyond politics. Hope you're psyched. Not just policies, not just plans. We're talking dreams, hobbies, and life's other strands. We'll meet the leaders behind the scenes, uncover the stories in between, the laughs, the quirks, the passions they hide, their personal moments, unfiltered and wide. Ready or not, let's get underway. This is Beyond Politics with Shay. Welcome to another episode of Beyond Politics with Shay, where I shine the spotlight on some of our favorite politicians and elected leaders. Hi, I'm Shay, and today we're joined by David Shoebridge. David is a former barrister and a current Greens senator. Before joining a career in politics, David had a former life in law. David joins us today, and he will share more about himself and his policy commitment, which is to ensure that he prioritizes the common good over corporate interests. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Shay. Lovely to be here.
Thank you so much. Let's get into our icebreaker round. Tell me, what is one thing that people don't know about you?
Don't know about me until now. I suppose one thing that people don't know about me is, who haven't followed me closely, is I'm happiest when I'm out going on a bushwalk, particularly with my wife and my daughters. I can't imagine a happier place than walking around a little light foot track, surrounded by family deep in the Australian bush. It fills me with an enormous sense of connectivity and happiness. That's my most centered place, I think.
Very nice. Something a little more personal. What is a compliment that you receive all the time?
Well, you're in politics, so you're not getting showered by compliments all the time. I think people like the kind of interrogation that we do, the holding, particularly government officials, senior ministers to account. They like some of those interactions, particularly at this process called budget estimates. They like seeing people in positions of power being sort of nailed down and held to account.
And a very notorious figure during those budget estimates. I could personally attest to that. Thank you for sharing. Okay, a more creative question. If you could introduce a feature or a change to the smartphone, whether that be Apple or Android, what would that be?
Oh, I'd love to be able to press a button so mine didn't work for 24 hours. That should be an option everyone has. You can press a button and they just go quiet for 24 hours and you can't get it back. And that would be a magical feature on a smartphone.
An extended do not disturb or...
Yeah, which you can't rescind. Once you press the button, it's not going to come back for 24 hours, no matter what the pressures are from your work or your family and the like. Yeah, that'd be lovely, wouldn't it?
Nice. Now, getting into your childhood, talk to us about your childhood and where you grew up.
Well, I grew up in Sydney on the sort of up around, technically it was Warunga, which sort of sounds fancy for those people who know Sydney, but it was really Normanhurst. And I grew up in a suburban family. I was surrounded by bushland up there. I was always out sort of wandering down the creeks into my local bushland. I went to, had a public school education. I went to Normanhurst Primary School and then Hornsby Primary School. And then I went to an agricultural school called James Roos Agricultural High School, which was also selective. So, that was compulsory agriculture. I can strip a lawnmower, I can contour plough, I can. I really actually enjoyed that time doing agriculture. My family life was a bit complicated. I had a very difficult relationship with my father. My family. My mum and my dad separated when I was a young teenager, and I had that wasn't that element of my life wasn't the easiest, but I forged a very strong friendship and relationship, particularly with my second eldest brother, and that's been actually really, really important throughout my life, and I feel very grateful for that relationship.
Thank you for that insight into your childhood and family. definitely want to dig in deeper. If you could share a story from your childhood, something that we could hand on heart say has shaped you and given us that insight into who you are today. You touched on it a little bit, but what would that story be?
Well, I think, being thrown into sort of self-reliance kind of quite early. As I said, my father left. My mother then had quite significant difficulty coming to terms with that and was absent for quite a significant period of my life as a teenager. And I think that gives you a lot of self-reliance. We always had a home, so I was never facing homelessness or anything, but suddenly learning you had to go out and earn some income, otherwise you just didn't have money to buy food. Being kind of self-regulated at a young age, and I was lucky. I had an older brother who really stepped up and was amazing. We have a younger sister. That was actually a pretty tough and formative part of my life. I wouldn't want to exaggerate it. I said we always had a home. Always felt kind of that degree of safety. But I think when you do that, particularly when you're a kid, it does kind of have a, I look back on it and I think it was kind of an important time in my life. It does make you more self-reliant and make you appreciate all those kind of supports that society should put in place for people.
Again, thank you for sharing that with us. Experiencing the world firsthand at a younger age definitely shaped a lot of your policy agenda that we see today. And obviously, I can tell by sharing that story as well, the gratitude that you have to your family and your siblings especially. If we can talk now about politics, I can see it coming through the responses, but what was the motivation behind entering a career in politics?
Well, I never had a plan to be a politician. In fact, growing up, there was almost no politics discussed with my parents. But I suppose, I went to university. I did a little bit of university politics. I didn't really enjoy that very much. I found it. I don't know, Shay, if you've ever done university politics, but it can be pretty noxious and nasty and personality based. So I did a tiny bit of that and drew away. And then I was quite happy being a lawyer and a barrister. I had a nice positive career as a barrister. I was enjoying that. It's a financially rewarding career, and I did a lot of work for people against employers, against insurance companies, acting for unions. Like I found, I could actually put my personal values into a lot of that work. But I at the time, there was a lot of attacks happening against working people's rights in my home state of New South Wales. The Labor government at the time was attacking workers' compensation rights in particular. And I'd acted for a number of these people who'd been injured at work and realised they were struggling to get by on the existing set of benefits. And the idea that a Labor government would be taking away workers' compensation rights, I found pretty awful. And I acted for a number of unions. The firm I was working with at the time as a solicitor, and they asked me to go and try and persuade state politicians to not cut workers' comp benefits. And the Labor Party had been directed en masse not to talk to anyone associated with the union movement, so we couldn't get a meeting. The Liberal Party thought that the attacks should go further and be harder and nastier. I got insulted in Parliament by a guy called Fred Nile, who said I was just some sort of self-interested lawyer trying to get more money from the system. And the only people who really engaged with us, and it was across the board, was the Greens. And there were these lovely Greens MPs who actually seemed to care about it. And they went into bat and they tried to protect workers' compensation rights. I saw them do it with courage. And I thought, well, actually, here's a bunch of people I could do some work with. And I found a lot of values that we shared. As I think I said to you, I love bushwalking, I love nature. And so this kind of social justice and protecting nature came together for me. And this was in the early 2000s as well. And it was also at a time when there was this push to have a war on Iraq. And I saw again some of the bravest voices speaking up for peace and non-violence and opposing war on Iraq were these federal and state Greens MPs and voices. And so, between social justice, protecting nature, and sort of peace and non-violence and speaking against war, that's what dragged me in to the Greens. But then I, as I said, I didn't want to become a politician. I had a sort of one of the mentors in the party, a state MP called John Kay. He kept pushing me and asking me to do stuff. He asked me to run for my local council, promising me that I wouldn't get elected, just that I'd be a nice thing to do for the party. And the next thing I found myself elected as a councillor. And, my life spiraled out of control from that point in my life, Shay.
They say you don't leave a career in politics. Thank you. Can really see that journey into the political world, but also into your policy agenda and your commitments. Looking at, again, your personality, you've touched on it before with bushwalking. If we can get into a passion or a talent, maybe a hidden talent, what is one passion or a hidden talent that you harbour?
Well, I don't know if I have a hidden talent. I do love doing woodwork, though. I love building things. I don't get enough time to do it in my current job, and I wouldn't necessarily I'm a talented carpenter or anything, but I love building things. So I like I like building things like a nice set of indoor shelves, fitted shelves into the house. I like repairing things, but if I get the chance and I can sit down with a circular saw, a couple of sawhorses, and spend a bit of time building something out of carpentry, that I find that kind of practical work that you can then, of course, boast about to your partner afterwards. I shouldn't be doing that. Look at those shelves I built.
Maybe something on Pinterest, the David Shoebridge gallery or collection. Yeah, I can definitely see that striking contrast as well. Okay, let's move into more of a policy discussion. You were a very, very active voice last year, especially within the Gaza and Israel conflict. You led a series of engagements with very diverse groups in the last year. Can you share with us some personal insights or common themes that you heard across these group discussions?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really brutal more than 12 months now. And, I mean, even just the last few weeks, as I think many of us in Australia have been spending time with family and, maybe going on holidays with families, having that chance to connect, just thinking about those millions of people in Gaza who have probably still trying to understand what's happened to their relatives and friends, having no home. That contrast at different times, it just keeps, I think it entirely correctly sort of intrudes into our daily thoughts. But no, the engagement that I had with a whole bunch of people through my formal portfolio work as the party spokesperson for immigration and multiculturalism, but also through my connections with community, particularly in Western Sydney. It's been some really heartbreaking times. I remember having a meeting just here in this office. We've had a number of meetings with the Palestinian community, and talking with young parents who had just managed, just by the skin of their teeth, escape out of Gaza through that border crossing into Egypt, and were here trying to re-establish their lives, their kids going to school, having a kind of, from our perspective, a normal schooling and being able to go to school without being fear for their lives. And talking to them about their concerns for their families, the lost loved ones that they have, the damage to their home, and trying to sort of navigate that sense of almost survivor guilt and relief. And it's incredibly hard, some of those meetings with the Palestinian community. But I also remember meeting with the broader Lebanese community soon after the assault on Lebanon, or the most recent assault on Lebanon started, and this sense of being nobody really noticing or caring, government not speaking up for them, not being able to get family members out. And I distinctly remember having a meeting here in the office, and we had a young man who's a member of the party who I've known for ages. Him and his dad were here, and their family home was in southern Lebanon. And as we were meeting the previous night, the village had been almost leveled by Israeli attacks, shelling and missile attacks, and engaging with people with that degree of raw grief, who were also feeling quite abandoned by their government at the time. I think those meetings, those engagements, as well as just your daily engagements with people on the phone, or as you're out at a meeting or you're out at a rally, if they don't move you politically, if they don't move you to be a little brave politically, I don't know what happens. I don't know what would be wrong with you if you could have those meetings and you weren't moved.
Definitely sharing some of those stories, participating in those discussions was a very welcoming aspect of last year's engagement with a lot of elected leaders. And I said it before, a lot of our viewers actually were very thankful to you and our other state and federal MPs that came out to support the peacekeeping efforts that were organised around Sydney. Thank you for doing that. If we could move on to the next question, though, on that advocacy and the activism that we're seeing, a lot of people took to the streets of Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth to protest about Gaza and Israel. Now that there's a very welcome ceasefire, a lot of people find it challenging to stay connected as there are developments. How would you suggest that they stay connected with their elected officials to continue the conversation and support these peacekeeping efforts?
Yeah, I think the rallies, if nothing else, they gave that sense of connectedness. You weren't sort of an isolated, you weren't isolated in your thoughts. You were suddenly surrounded by thousands of other people who share our values about ending war, about protecting kids, about sort of peace with justice. And it was, for me, I regularly attended the rallies in Sydney, and in other cities when I was travelling as a federal MP. That sense of connectedness was one of the things that I thought was probably most valuable and powerful out of the rallies. And now, we have a ceasefire. Maintaining that sense of connectedness, I think, is going to be really critical. I imagine we'll have occasional continuing rallies, and I think to try and ensure that we get some form of peace with justice, I think they'll be important. But, as you know, Shay, many communities are quite active and have quite active social connections. I would lean into those. But I would also say keep engaged with your politicians. Like, request meetings, come with friends, come with your local community group, come with your with representatives, and expect and be entitled to have meetings with your local reps. I think often people who are associated with traditional sort of powerful lobby groups, whether it's corporate or national or religious or political, they have a very strong sense of entitlement that they will ask for and demand and get meetings with politicians. But often people from the Middle Eastern community, the Arab community, Lebanese community, they don't have that sense of entitlement, that you are entitled to a meeting, and your federal senator should meet with you, your local federal MP should meet with you and has an obligation to meet with you, and you should expect it and demand it and get it. That's what I'd urge on people. These federal MPs are elected to represent the people. If you're a senator, everyone in the state. If you're a local rep, everyone in your seat. And you should be demanding and getting meetings, and come with friends and demand some actual concrete action at the end of it. Don't just, let them use you for a photo opportunity, but insist on leaving the meeting that they're actually going to do something practical to help.
That's great to know, especially come this time of the year. There's still conversation going clearly, and the offices around the country are open for those that want to connect with their leaders, which is a very welcome change and part, obviously, of our democratic country. We had a lot of bad news last year, especially for our viewers whose families are from Syria, from Palestine, and from Lebanon. Can you share with us some more positive moments that you experienced in the last year?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my team does a reasonable amount of advocacy on migration and refugee matters, and we can't advocate for everybody. We have limited resources, but you know, I have a wonderful member of my team who does a lot of that direct advocacy. And like every time that someone's got a visa, their mum or their dad's been able to come to the country because of that work, and we kind of celebrate it as a team, that feels like a meaningful difference to people's lives when we can help. And I stress we can't help in every occasion. I do recall having a number of really powerful meetings in the federal parliament. I remember a group of I think about 35 women from sort of the broader Arab network coming into Parliament, and they were all suffering different degrees of grief and trauma. But, you know, those women who have a strong sense of purpose, who know their mind, and with as much humour as they can and good grace as they can. I remember them coming and filling up this room with a mixture of laughter and tears and direction, and telling a whole lot of truths about this conflict in Gaza, about the war crimes and about the reality of what was happening to their lives, and speaking some hard truths to politicians with that mixture of, as I said, intelligence and history and humour. It felt like a bit of, that for me was one of those moments where I thought, actually, this is maybe what we should be using Parliament a lot more for, hearing that powerful advocacy. And I suppose, you know, one of the things I've really enjoyed about the work that I've done as a Green senator is, you know, there's 15 of us in the federal parliament between senators and lower house reps. And throughout all of the pressure that we've been under, throughout the horrors that the community has been facing, I've felt every single time that all of my team members, every time I went out and made some advocacy for peace, advocacy for the Palestinian people, advocacy for ending this brutal war, for Australia not to be part of the problem, I felt this kind of unity from my team backing me. And in politics, I've got to tell you, when your team is backing you and you know that they're going to back you and they know they're going to back you when you're in a tough spot, that makes all the difference. And I've really felt that the last 12 months, and I felt grateful to be in the political party I'm in.
Massive accomplishment for any politician, and a huge effort, obviously, across different groups in our society. Moving on to a different question now, multiculturalism. Some people say that it's been working. Some people have said recently that it's not. And there's been a lot of focus recently, in recent times, on the not working part, and these voices are very vocal. From a policy perspective, how can we take some of these views, obviously that aren't the racist views that we're seeing online, but how can we take some of these views to develop better and more effective policy?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think there's any question that multiculturalism is amazingly successful in Australia. I mean, I live in Sydney, and I love I'm unashamedly a fan of Sydney, but this city with people from every single country on the planet who I think have a sense of kind of living in Australia, identifying with Australia, all the benefits and positivities about being an Australian, but also bringing to that proud and continued connection to cultures from around the world. And it works. Sydney is an amazing place. And I'd say the same for Melbourne and Brisbane. You know, I'm fondest of Sydney, I'll be frank, I live here. People who say that multiculturalism is broken or it doesn't work, I think the daily truth of living in this amazing city speaks against that. You know, you sometimes find politicians wanting to trivialise multiculturalism's achievement as being, different kinds of cuisine, different types of food. For me, I mean, it's been a sense of deep gratitude, the work I do with multicultural communities, whether it's going out to a Sikh Gurdwara and seeing, if you've been to the kitchen of a Sikh Gurdwara where they can feed 2,000 people on a weekend, and going for a tour through the kitchens and sitting down and having that shared meal and that shared experience and that wonderful way of connecting with community. I mean, I'd like some more of that for society, please. Or going out late at night, going for a walk down the main street of Lakemba, which is alive and open and buzzing until midnight, and there's no alcohol. And it's just this wonderful kind of connected street of friends and neighbours and businesses all working together. Like, I think we sometimes, you'll hear politicians often from the right of politics, but not only from the right of politics, wanting to sort of divide us and separate us and talk about problems of multiculturalism. I think they are deliberately trying to pretend those strengths don't exist. And Shay, one of the things that we will see in this election, we're already seeing it, but we'll see it ramped up by, and my guess is both the Labor Party and the Coalition will do it, is they'll be trying to blame migrant communities for all of the problems they haven't fixed. If they haven't invested enough in Medicare and they haven't spent enough on public hospitals, that won't be the politicians' fault. They'll be saying, oh, it's because we've got too many migrants. If public transport is crowded one afternoon, oh, that will be because of too many migrants. If housing prices have gone up, oh, that will be because of, this simple solution from their perspective, which gets them out of trouble because they can pretend it's not their fault for failing to invest in our hospitals, failing to invest in our transport, failing to invest in public housing, and they can all blame migrants as their go-to solution. I think that's going to be a real danger in the election, and I think we should push back against it because it's plainly not true. And I'll give you just one example on the housing point. We were crunching the numbers the other day about house prices and migration because you hear Peter Dutton say, oh, it's because we have too many migrants. You'll hear Anthony Albanese say, oh, it's failure to plan for migrants. In COVID, I mean, it seems some time ago, but for those 2 and a bit years in COVID that we were having lockdowns, we had negative population growth in Australia. Like, we had negative migration almost for the first time in history. And do you know what happened to house prices in Sydney? Across the country, in fact. So migration went backwards, population numbers went down, and housing prices increased by 1/3 across the country. Why don't we hear politicians telling the truth about what's wrong with our housing market, for example, is not migrants who are often a core workforce to build new housing. What's wrong with our housing market is some really cooked, broken policies by federal and state governments, and they should take responsibility rather than try and push it on migrants and multiculturalism.
Very complex complexities there. Obviously, you could see the immigration and multiculturalism cutting across several policy areas. Last policy-related discussion question from me. How would you define a successful multicultural country?
Well, I mean, I think Australia is a great example of a successful multicultural country. But I'd define it as this. One where we kind of unite around a bunch of common values, democracy, tolerance, respect for each other, and helping each other. And, for me, those are kind of incredibly powerful values that stick our community together. We believe in democracy. Surely we want to help each other. We're tolerant of other people's differences and different opinions. And we want each other to succeed in life, in work, in family. And yet we super respectful of that differences. And we look at each other not to see, what divides us and what our differences are. We accept we're going to have differences, but we lean into those things that sort of unite us as a people. And as it turns out, everybody wants their kids to be safe. Everybody wants their kids to have an amazing future. We all want the planet to not cook itself. We love each other to have jobs that we find rewarding and creative. And we'd like an honest government that tells us the truth and tries to help make our lives better. I think that's the kind of multicultural community I want, where we're frank and honest and tolerant of our differences, but celebrate how we can build an amazing country together.
Thank you for sharing. Let's change up the pace. Moving on to rapid fire. 5 questions from me. Answer please with the first thing that comes to mind. There's obviously no right or wrong. It's just a way for us to shake you up a bit after all of that policy discussion. Thank you again for sharing. All right, David, favorite movie?
Favorite movie? Oh, I am a sci-fi tragic. I love a good Star Trek film. I'm sorry.
I think Jason Clare had a very similar response. Okay, now moving.
Respect him for that.
Okay, why? So is it just because you're a tragic sci-fi nerd?
Yeah, I'm a sci-fi nerd. I'm a Green Senator. Of course, I'm a nerd. That's part of what that comes with the territory. Shay.
Nice. Okay, favorite song then?
There's one I've had a brainworm. Happy Song by Alex the Astronaut. It is such a sweet, beautiful song, and it was a lovely summer song for me. It's a happy song. I kind of
you've answered the why part, but again, I can see that sci-fi kind of vibe that's there in your life.
Yep. Well, she's very much not the astronaut. She's a local Australian singer. Very much. I think that might be tongue in cheek, but it is a beautiful, sweet song.
Nice. I missed it. Clearly, I haven't heard the song, but I will do after this. Favorite meal? So obviously you touched on Australia being a multicultural country. No pressure there, but favorite meal?
I love noodles. I just love noodles. I mean, my wife is from Hong Kong, and that part of my family I lean into. But yeah, oil spill noodles is one of my favorite at the moment. Big fat white rice noodles or egg noodles with lots of chili. That is delicious.
Thank you. Okay, a very similar question. Maybe it has something to do with noodles. A favorite cafe or restaurant in Sydney or anywhere in Australia, really?
Well, I mean, it won't surprise you. Chinatown Noodle Restaurant, which is one of the most uninspiring names, but it's a gorgeous food that it's a go-to for my family. And if we're not doing noodles, they do this sweet deep fried eggplant with this kind of sticky, sweet deliciousness on it. Yeah, Chinatown Noodle Restaurant.
Very nice. Very nice. A lot of very good flavor, good vibe. Mm-hmm. Okay, a trickier one, I think, especially if you haven't been reading lately. What is the last book that you've read?
Oh, this is going to go back to the sci-fi theme. Hail Mary. I read Hail Mary, which is by the same author who wrote The Martian. And if you haven't read it, it's super sweet too. There's a little creature in it called Rocky. And, I'm not much of a weeper, but there was a tear in my eye at different times with Hail Mary and this little creature called Rocky. That was kind of sweet. It's a pretty easy read too. Again,
pulling out the emotions there, David. So very, very clear there. And thank you for those tips as well. Okay, before we close off this episode, what is one piece of advice, whether that be life advice or career advice, or a personal mantra that you'd like to share with our viewers?
Well, I suppose political advice, but it's also life advice. In my experience, often people, when they're commencing a campaign or they want to achieve something, they can see all the problems in it and they can think, it won't succeed, it's really hard. And my advice is if you don't try, you're guaranteed to lose. So absolutely give it a go because that's how you win. And that's that's my advice. Just if you really want it, you think it's important, well, just do it, give it a go. Because if you don't, you're guaranteed not to get it. And for me, it's a kind of simple thing that I try and do in my politics. If I think it's right, we give it a go.
Thank you so much for sharing that, David, and for joining us on Beyond Politics with Shay. I'm going to close off this episode by giving David the platform to share with you on how best to contact him, obviously, after this episode. And for those watching, please don't forget to like or share this episode with your networks. David, over to you.
Oh, thanks, Shay. Well, look, I mean, you can follow us, obviously, on pretty much all the social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. We're trying to move a bit away from Twitter because it's become a bit toxic, but Blue Sky. If you want to get in contact with the office, the best way is actually send an email to senator.shoebridge@aph.gov.au. You can Google that and get our contacts. And we do try and pride ourselves on getting back to people. You fairly engage with us, and we do everything we possibly can to engage back. So we look forward to hearing from people.
Thank you, David, and thank you to our viewers. Until next time, take care.
Cheers, Shane.